While many Lithuanian Americans have built Lithuanian monuments in their backyards, the Paegle family in Maine took this to a whole new level. They have created an entire public art trail, Alexander Art Trail in Alexander, Maine, which is full of Baltic sculptures. And they even created a Baltic Island in a local lake. So how did this all start and when?
Yeah, well, the idea of these sculptures started when we started going to Lithuania in 1991 and started to visit a lot of their sculpture parks like Raganų kalnas, and Latvians have a similar thing. And we thought, oh, wait a minute, we live in the woods and Lithuanians and Latvians are great carvers. Maybe we can get them to carve some stuff for us and start our own Raganų kalnas type thing. And actually some of the sculptures on our trail were carved by the original folks that created Raganų kalnas in Lithuania.
What sculptures are there?
Well, we have Little Red Riding Hood and the Wolf, and then Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, and we have the Old Man, then a bunch of animals, the Hunter. And also the other thing is we got some American chainsaw sculptures so that we could show the difference between hand-carved sculptures, which the Latvians and Lithuanians did, compared to chainsaw sculptures, which is very popular in Maine. Yeah, we have quite a few people finding this place because we have joined the Eastport Art Gallery, and they have put out a brochure which goes to all of the rest stops along the roads here to Maine. And since we are the Alexander, it's in alphabetical order, and since we are the Alexander Art Trail, we're right on top. We're the first people on there. And then the other thing we realized during the pandemic, somebody had started a scavenger hunt or treasure hunt that $20,000 was hidden in one of these very out-of-the-way places. And you had to come to the place, you had cars, and you had to go to that place, and you had to take a picture. Over here, you had to take a picture of the Old Man, and also up there, and you had to show what was written, tell what was written on top of that exhibit. So we had people coming from all over the United States. It was amazing. Nobody ever found $20,000. I don't know, maybe somewhere it is, but I haven't found any on the trail.
Yesterday we went to this fabulous Baltic Island here in this lake. So you actually even lobbied the local government to name the island the Baltic Island, yeah?
Well, it was unnamed, and it wasn't just the local government. We ended up having to take the issue all the way to Washington, D.C., and have the federal agencies allow us to name it Baltic Island because they put it on the map. So now if you Google Baltic Island, Alexander, Maine, we will come up.
And the Baltic Island has Lithuanian and Latvian flags, and also Medijų sculpture, which is a copy of the original sculpture in Vilnius of the Baltic goddess of hunting, yeah. And also a history dome. So what is the idea behind that history dome?
Well, History Dome was a place where we wanted to put originally mementos, family mementos, and we needed a structure that wouldn't burn. And then, of course, normally if you put in mementos 50 years from now or 20 years from now, they just disappear. They're in buildings, and the buildings get knocked down, and nobody could ever find them. So we built, we had people come from Texas. They built the dome, which is like a bunker. Originally we started with just personal items in there, and then we thought, well, we're doing this, why not include everybody? And so then we started with the time capsules, and we have the 50 and 100 and 1,000-year time capsules in there in this History Dome. So this was closed in 2000, so in 2050 it will be opened up. And we have a lot of stuff that went in there. The first one, the 50-year, was very popular, and we have contributions from local government, our federal government, newspapers, businesses, students.
We were inside the History Dome, and there are lots of images from your family history, and a lot of those images are from your life and protests against the Soviet regime here in the United States and America. So you are from Lithuania, and your husband was from Latvia, yeah?
Correct.
So like a true Baltic interethnic family.
Yeah, we didn't find any Estonians. We keep saying the kids are Estonian.
So what did you do? Like, what is in those images? Like, what did you do here helping Lithuania from America?
Well, we did a lot of protesting. I went to Lithuanian Saturday School, and they taught us, they had us protesting against the Soviets from a very early age. And so then when Simas jumped,
Simas Kudirka.
Yeah, Simas Kudirka, we did a lot of protesting to get him back, and eventually we did find a way to get the Soviets to release him.
So the story of Simas Kudirka was very famous back in 1970s, as he was a Lithuanian sailor who escaped a Soviet fishing vessel by jumping to an American vessel. But it took lots of time for him to actually get to America, and Gražina was instrumental in this lobbying effort. But we will continue about that later.
Then when we started going back to Lithuania, we realized that there were a lot of things that they needed once they were going to be a free nation. So the first thing we did, we got a grant and we did an exchange program, moving 15 students from Tacoma, Washington to 5 to each country, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, and then moving 5 from each country back into Tacoma. Then the other thing we realized that, when they divided the land, they were going to have problems with farming because there was lack of equipment, and maybe even knowledge. So we got farmers in Indiana to take Lithuanian agriculture students to work on the farms for the summertime. So things like that. And then, of course, the hospitals, there was a drug problem. People could not get drugs. So in America, the doctors had to throw the drugs out before they expired. And so we went around and got drugs and brought medicine, brought that, those kind of drugs. So we brought those to the Baltics. And then when some of the equipment just as the hospitals were changing out equipment, we were able to talk the administrators into shipping like MRI machines and X-ray machines and things into those countries.
And back during the times when both Lithuania and Latvia were still under the Soviet occupation, what motivated you the most, to participate in that campaign to allow Simas Kudirka to leave Lithuania for the United States?
Because we were raised demonstrating, so it's just something that went wrong, and it was the thing that actually motivated us. What Simas did is one thing, but the thing that we thought about is that we realized that the Russians were using the return of Simas against the United States. They let their military, their ships, their merchant marines, their fishing ships, their actors and their dancers and whatever, they were all told that if you try to defect, you will be given back because we have an agreement with the United States, and they use Simas as the example. So in other words, Simas's return made the United States jail keepers for the Soviet Union. And that was something that had to be turned. And like I said, we lucked out and found a way to turn that around. So yes, Soviets were not happy.
Yeah, and you mentioned you even threw leaflets from a plane on top of Soviet fishing vessels, so that encouraging the Lithuanian and Latvian sailors there to jump to America, basically.
Well, once we found out what the propaganda was, we've also realized that they're using these very fine nets for fishing in the international waters. So we had leaflets printed in 5 languages, Lithuanian, Latvian, Estonian, Russian, and English. And basically the leaflets said that, there was no agreement. The United States is not going to give you back if you decide to defect. And then it gave a telephone number to call if you did make it to the, if you jumped and you did make it out, where you could get some help. And we found out where the Soviets were fishing and got 2 planes and wrapped these leaflets, which were very thin, of course, and they were actually made on latex that they make ladies' girdles out of, so they wouldn't disintegrate in salt water. And we threw the leaflets from the airplanes, and hoping that these leaflets would come up in the nets, or in the fishing nets, which apparently did happen. But no, we never heard from anybody.
As I can see, you were very inventive in your actions, and all this inventiveness can still be seen here in Alexander, Maine, in the Alexander R Trail, and all the sculptures here. But you originally, when you have fled from Lithuania, you lived in the New York area, New York and New Jersey. So why Maine and why art?
Well, my husband had a degree in art, a fine arts degree from Yale. And then he became a physician. And he was interested in sculpting himself. And the island, well, having lived in New York, he wanted a nice quiet place. So the island was an ideal situation, getting away from everything. And, so that's why the island was bought. And the art is because he liked art himself. And once he retired, that's what he did, is he made driftwood sculptures and did other sculptures. The sculptures on the island are all his.
Yeah, so everybody can visit the Alexander R Trail here in Alexander, Maine. It's actually even on the Google Maps, I believe, but right now it will also be included in map.lithuania.com map of Lithuanian American heritage sites, and global.lithuania.com encyclopedia of Lithuanian heritage sites in America. There are many of them, even in Maine. There is, let's say, a Lithuanian convent and a hotel in the resort town of Kennebunkport, Maine, and there are even more all around New England. So I invite you to seek out, if you are traveling here, to see what interesting Lithuanian sites exist there and, well, to visit them. And so after our conversation, could you tell in detail the whole story behind the defection of Simas Kudirka that has inspired several movies?
Well, Simas Kudirka was a fisherman. He actually was a radio operator on the Sovietska Litva, which was a Soviet Lithuanian fishing vessel that was out to sea fishing. And because of the irregularities in fishing, the Americans demanded to have a meeting with the Russians to discuss the use of fine nets that they were using for catching fish. So the meeting was to go into international waters. However, there was a storm, and so the Americans invited the Soviets into Martha's Vineyard, into American territorial waters, to have these discussions. And so the two ships were tied close together, and they went back and forth on the ships having these discussions. And on the ship was the head of the fishing industry from New Brunswick, which was a Latvian, who had himself escaped from the Soviets many years. So during those discussions, Simas decided that, well, the Americans were throwing things over onto the Sovietska Litva, and everybody was cheering each other. And Simas was on deck, and somebody threw. He said there was Playboy magazines across, and one of the guys picked it up, and of course the KGB was on board. They picked it up, and they told this guy, "You're never going to sail again," which meant his life would be over. He wouldn't get a job when he went back to Lithuania. So Simas decided he had had enough, and he was going to jump, and he did. He jumped onto the American ship, Coast Guard ship, and unfortunately, the Russians were not off the American ship. As he started climbing the steps, he met up with the Russians. And so the Coast Guard hit him, but the Russians went back to their ship, and the Americans cut the lines and started moving, and of course the Russians were demanding that they return him. This went to Washington, and a lot of things went wrong, and they were allowed to come on board an American ship in American waters to beat him and drag him back to a Soviet ship. Had it been in international waters, it would have been different, but this was on American territory, in American waters. And so there are, of course, the Coast Guard was told they're not allowed to say anything, luckily, Brieze, who was actually quite a hero because he depended on the Coast Guard for his business, and he was in charge of the fishing industry in New Brunswick, in New Bedford. And so he said he stayed up at night thinking, what is he going to do? If he says anything, he could lose his business because he depends on the Coast Guard. But having escaped himself, he could not say anything. So he decided, well, in the morning he would go to a friend who happened to be a TV announcer and told him the story. And then it got out. It was, of course, on, but there was a local channel. So we decided at that time, we heard about it, of course. So we wrote up his story and then decided, let's go demonstrate in Manhattan, which we demonstrated many times in Manhattan. Nobody pays attention to you. They don't even know what Lithuania is. They kept saying, that's not your religion, is it? And so we were on 42nd Street demonstrating, handing out these leaflets. And to our surprise, the New York Times showed up. And it was on the front page of a Sunday New York Times, and that was it. When we spoke to the State Department, they said that actually they had the think tank on trying to figure out how could they get the Russians to release Simas. And they couldn't come up with anything. So eventually we all pretty much thought, well, this is it. You know, we demonstrated, we found out where he was in Perm, so we had demonstrations in front of the Russian embassy in Manhattan, and we had children bringing gifts to Simas, to the Russian embassy, we tried all kinds of things just to keep his name alive. And then a letter came out of Lithuania which said that Simas's mother was born in the United States. And which doesn't mean very much, really, except that we also found out that Simas was illegitimate. And that was the thing that got him actually his citizenship, because what was told to us by the Immigration Department, that the U.S. citizenship comes from the mother, not from the father. And lucky for Simas that his mother never remarried. Had Schulskis adopted him, that would have been the end of it. But it's really ironic that that many years later, something which was, not heard of, or which actually wasn't a good thing in Lithuania, in a Catholic country, to have a baby, that's the thing that saved her son's life.
Yeah. So basically, when you proved that he was American citizen, they had to allow him out of Soviet Union.
Well, what we did is we lobbied Congress, and by the time we got done with Congress, we had 200 members of Congress on our side. And one of the things that I think really helped is the fact that we had a lawyer who we kept sending to the Russian embassy all the time, telling them, if you do this, we will do that. Telling them the truth. Russians do not tell truth, so they never believed us. But we followed through on everything that we told them we were going to do. And our lawyer found out that they were sending a team from the Politburo to the United States, which never happened before, to lobby the U.S. Congress for trade agreements. And, of course, Henry Kissinger at the time wanted the trade agreements with the Russians. So when we found out that they were going to be lobbying Congress, we went to Capitol Hill and we ran around Congress and we said, when the Russians come in, just ask them one question: when is Simas coming out? That's all, nothing else. And they agreed. So as these high officials were going from office to office, the question they were given: when is Simas coming out? They were not happy. And then there was a reception, and I got a call from Congressman Hanahan's office, and the gal said, there's going to be fireworks tonight because there's a reception, and we're probably going to have an international incident. And so anyway, she called me back, and she was laughing, and she said, well, the Russians came to the reception, and Derwinski said, when is Simas coming out? And the Russians got so furious they left. And so the Russians were so angry that they didn't tell the State Department that they were releasing Simas. They threw him out. And Simas thought Well, they let you out of jail and then they kill you on the road. And he was prepared to die. He thought that's what they were going to do to him, is kill him on the road. They just let him go. And so then I got a call, and I talked to, my aunt came that time. It wasn't his mother that came to the phone. My aunt in Lithuania came. She said, Simas is home. And so I called congressional offices that I always called after every call. And they called the State Department. The State Department said, we know nothing about it. They wouldn't even tell the Americans that they threw him out. They were so angry. Well, then eventually, well, that still wasn't the end of it. I mean, they tried to get them to change their mind and everything. And so, but eventually we ended up getting the whole family out. So it was his mother, his 2 kids, and his wife that came out. And they lived with us for 8 months.